everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do my Japan wrap-up for Invisible Cities. So if you haven't heard what Invisible Cities is, it is a reading project that I'm hosting with a bunch of other people where we read world literature, 3 countries at a time. So one of the countries for January was Japan, and I sort of focused in on that. I consumed various things related to Japan, both in terms of music, in terms of books and movies, and some other bits and bobs. So I thought that I would share some of the things with you, starting with music. I listened to particularly 2 new groups to me. I have listened to a lot of Japanese music since my young teens, I think, but the 2 new ones to me was Omoi no Take, which is a fairly new group, I think, and I've been obsessively listening to all of their music this month. It's very uplifting, sort of a mix of funk and pop and sort of indie vibes, which is exactly what I've been in the mood for in terms of music listening this month, when January often feels very bleak and cold and dark and all of those things. I've been sort of reaching for more uplifting music, and this definitely fit the bill. The other group I've been listening to is Unicorn, which I think is a rock group that started working in the 80s, and I've actually been listening to a lot of old school rock in January. But this one particularly stands out to me in terms of my Japanese music listening. So I wanted to mention those 2 bands that I've been listening to all throughout the month. I will link their Spotify profiles below. In terms of movies, I didn't actually end up watching a lot of Japanese movies because I've been watching stuff related to the Gothenburg Film Festival. So I have been watching a lot of movies and a lot of world cinema, just not from Japan. The 2 I did get to was Mirai, which I didn't care that much about. We watched it with my movie marathon group, and it was actually my suggestion, but it didn't really work that well for me. It is a time travel story, and it's an animated movie. I feel like I've seen better versions of that kind of story in the past. One of the examples that comes to mind is The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, and yeah, this just didn't really hit the mark for me. But the other one did, and that is Castle of Cagliostro, which is one of Hayao Miyazaki's earliest works, right before the Ghibli studio started. And this one is about the famous or infamous Lupin character. There's been various adaptations of movies and live action and a series featuring this character who is a master thief. But Castle of Cagliostro is, as I said, one of Miyazaki's earliest works, and it's got a typical feel of the 1970s style of animation, and I really enjoyed the story and the playfulness of the animation style itself. Next, I wanted to mention something I just discovered, and that is Japan Foundation has started a video series on their YouTube channel where they have translators of Japanese books into English speak to Japanese authors. I think that is the purpose of the video series. And so the first video chat, Zoom chat they did and have shared on their YouTube channel is with Yumiri and Maureen Giles, who is the translator of Tokyo Ueno Station, which is one of the books I read in January, and it was fascinating to listen to their talk. There's also Alison Markin Powell is part of the conversation, as is Stephen Snyder. Both of them are translators and probably names you recognize if you've read a lot of Japanese books in English. So it's just a fascinating thing, fascinating talk, this particular episode. But also it's something I'm looking forward to following. It's great to hear directly from both the translators and from the authors themselves. So I'm looking forward to exploring that in the future, and I wanted to share it with you in case you had missed that. Then we move on to the books I read for Japan. So first of all, we have The Great Passage by Shion Miura, and this is translated by Juliet Winters Carpenter. This was the only book I ended up reading that I had actually planned to read in January for Japan. This is a story about a lexicographer, a team of lexicographers creating this new dictionary that has been in the works for a long time. When the book starts, we are following one of the new members of the team, and he is sort of adapting to this new job and becoming part of the team and becoming friends with new people. But also he has some love troubles that is sort of part of the story as well. And then halfway through the book we switch over to another main character, and she's again another new member to the team, but it's several years later and the dictionary is almost complete. So the structure of the book is just following the dictionary production, and the end of the book is when the dictionary is actually published or complete. I think particularly if you are someone who's interested in language and in translation and communication and in writing, of course, there's a lot of that sort of the love for language is woven into the book, because the characters believe very strongly in the work that they do for the dictionary. The characters themselves have a beautiful relationship together. There's a lot of friendship in this one, a camaraderie in the group of the lexicographers that I found very warm and tender, and it was just a really enjoyable reading experience. And I also think that Juliet Winters Carpenter is a fantastic translator. I'm coming to realize that she is probably one of the standout translators for me, because she is able to translate books that talk about Japanese language in English translation. I think she is able to capture it so well, sort of the complexity of talking about translation in a translated language. Is a fantastic feat, so I would strongly recommend this one. Next up, I reread a book, and that is Kokoro by Natsume Soseki. This was translated by Meredith McKinney, and the reason I wanted to reread this one was because it was referenced in The Great Passage. This is following a young man who is studying at the university, and by chance he meets an older man that he starts to call sensei, which is basically like, in this scenario, it's someone he looks up to, someone he sees as a role model for a way of life. And so the book follows their relationship and the way that this narrator is kind of lost and trying to figure out how he wants to live and sort of his values, his purpose, and what he wants to accomplish in his life, while also trying to come closer to this man he calls sensei. And the closer he comes to him, the more he realizes that sensei is hiding something, or that there is sort of a troubled past to this man. And in the second half of the book, we follow or we see parts of Sensei's story and sort of the background and how he became who he was in the first half of the book. The interesting thing for me with this one is that I actually didn't like this one very much when I first read it. There were a lot of things that I didn't like about Sensei's character, and I think I found him quite annoying. I found the novel quite dull. It's interesting because with this second reading, I enjoyed it much more. First of all, I think I connected with the narrator much more this time. There's some things related to his university experience that I think resonated with my own experience, and sort of being a part of a very specific context when you're in university, and how you see the world and everything is shaped by being part of that that institution or that world, and it shapes everything shapes everything in your life and how you think of everything for a while before you find your footing. And it's especially interesting when this narrator travels back home to meet his parents who live in the country, and there's a sort of clash in his worldview from his studies and university life and sort of city life compared to them living in the country and being sort of to him less polished, less elegant. Their values clashes with his new values. So there's a lot of things related to him that I felt like I understood much better this time, and I think it's probably because of where I'm at in my life compared to the first time I read this book. The other part of this that I reacted to differently is Sensei's character. You can tell how much he is grieving and mourning and in pain from the first page. Even when you're just seeing him from a distance, you can tell that he has a burden on his shoulders, and every decision he makes right from the beginning, they sort of make sense if you are familiar with his background story and how he distances himself from everyone, all humans, and even how he is so guarded against the narrator, but also there's a certain sense of wanting to connect with another person and wanting to share his story that he hasn't even shared with his wife. So there was a melancholy to this book that I think hit me differently this time. I have written full reviews of both this and The Great Passage, so I will link those below in case you would like to learn more. Then the next one I read was Tokyo Ueno Station by Yumiri, translated by Morgan Giles, as I mentioned before listening, that I listened to the talk they did. Tokyo Ueno Station is a book about a homeless narrator who looks back on his life, and it's not linear. It goes back and forth in time. The narrator was born in the 30s, and in the 60s he moves to Tokyo to get work to support his family back in Fukushima. So he spends most of his adult life working away from his family. Later in life he lives a few years with his wife, but when she dies he moves back again to Tokyo, and he ends up being homeless in the last decade or more of his life in Tokyo. Throughout this book you are seeing sort of the margins of Japan. Japan seen through the margins, which is, I think, what makes this such a unique experience. It's an aspect to Japan that you don't normally see, especially not in English translation. And so for that reason alone, it was well worth reading. But what I think works particularly well is how Yumiri tells this story. I mentioned in my review that she writes very intentionally the form of the book. For example, the narrator will talk about his life and he will talk about memories, very stream of consciousness style. And then suddenly the narration will move away from him. For example, the scene is in the park, and instead of focusing in on the homeless man, we are shifting our gaze to a dialogue happening between two women talking about something very animatedly, and suddenly we're no longer talking about the homeless man. He's still sort of there in the shadows, but he's not on the page anymore until some pages later. And this constant shift of the focus is, to me, an example of how invisible he is. Despite being present, he isn't getting attention because he's stagnant. And part of the margins, part of the edge of the scene. So the form itself was very powerfully done in conveying the ideas of sort of the lack of presence of the narrator. And again, this has a melancholic tone throughout it, but it was another really great reading experience, so another one I would highly recommend. Last of all, I read A Galley of Black Box by Shiori Ito. This was translated by Ellison Markin Powell. So this is coming out in July by Feminist Press, so I managed to get my hands on A Galley. It was available on Edelweiss, so I immediately ended up reading it. And it is a memoir by the author who was the victim of rape a few years ago, and she talks about the rape itself, the event, and all of her struggle in getting justice for this, in terms of sort of the process of dealing with this case, in terms of contact with police, with lawyers, with media, and all of the other things that that is part of the process in getting justice. And part of the story is also just sort of social commentary around sexual violence in Japan, about the law in Japan in general, and the way that a patriarchal hierarchy and patriarchal society fails a lot of people in this country because of the underdeveloped laws that exists, especially regarding sexual violence. I think this was angering to read in a way that I haven't read a lot of books that made me angry in a while, so I think for that reason as well it hit me very hard. There's a lot of very intelligent commentary related, as I said, to the sexual violence issue in Japan and how it is in fact a social problem that affects everyone in a society, especially when things are not working as they should in supporting the victims of these crimes. She talks about horrendous experiences with various people that she comes across as a part of the process. She talks about a lot of the ways that the institutions and the people that are supposed to support the victim in this vulnerable situation, how they end up becoming part of this second victimization. As the author also points out, Japan is seen as this very safe country, and of course I'm sure in a lot of ways it is, but it isn't without its flaws, and just because it's safe in certain aspects doesn't mean that there isn't work to do, which honestly could definitely be said for Sweden as well, which I know is also part of the Scandinavian utopia idea. There are a lot of good things about Scandinavia, but it isn't foolproof, and I think it's a dangerous idea to think of any country as perfect. So yeah, I really appreciated this book. I think it taught me a lot about Japanese law and the sort of the system within which this crime happened, and in sort of her context of this experience. So I'm really glad I got a chance to read this one, and definitely look out for it when it comes out in July. So those are all of the books that I actually finished in January for Japan, but I also have been reading two books I'm just gonna very briefly mention here. So first we have Chihirokuma Cafe, which is a manga. This is the first volume and I'm reading it in Japanese for practice. So one of the other things I've been doing in January is to sort of kickstart my Japanese learning again, which is one of my goals for this year, is to practice my Japanese, French, and to take up Persian as well. It's one of the goals I haven't talked about because it's not reading related necessarily, but it fit well with January Invisible Cities, Japan being one of the countries. So I've been practicing kanji through the Anki flashcard program, which I highly recommend, by the way. If you are practicing vocabulary or anything along those lines, definitely look to see if Anki has a deck for it. It's a great program that basically has flashcards that allows you to practice in a very efficient way. I have actually read this one before, I'm just sort of rereading it for practice purposes, but I love the series, and the anime is a strong recommendation. It's so funny. So there's that. And then a book that I also started but have not finished is Starting Point, 1979 to 1996, and this is by Hayao Miyazaki. So this is a collection of essays that he has written, or essays, lectures, talks that he has done over the years. So this is obviously the time span for this particular volume. There's also a second volume that is called Turning Point, I think, that I am planning to get eventually when I finish this one, but I have only made it about a fifth of the way through this one. It's not really the kind of book that I want to breeze through, because there's obviously different essays and different lectures. I'm just going to be reading this over probably a few months, to be honest, but I've been really enjoying hearing, especially seeing the earlier texts that he's written, because a lot of them are before Studio Ghibli started, so it's interesting to hear sort of his values and his ideas and his aspirations at the time, and how they turned out to be true in his work for Ghibli. So yeah, I'm enjoying this one, and we'll talk more about it when I actually end up finishing it, which will be a while to come. So that is all I wanted to say for this Japan wrap-up of Invisible Cities. I will do my regular January wrap-up in the next few days. I hope if you have been doing Invisible Cities in January that you found something that you enjoyed, whether it be books or movies or food even. I haven't actually done any Japanese food or any food related to the project yet. Hopefully that will happen in February. But yeah, I hope you have enjoyed. If you have already participated in Invisible Cities, or if you are planning to do so in February, let me know. I would love to hear what your plans are, or in general what you read in January. I would love to hear about that as well. I hope you're doing well and you're taking care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon.